First off, to put this in context, this is our National Seismic Hazard Map. We update this every 6 years to evaluate the risk of ground motion in the U.S. from earthquakes over the long term. And as Nico talked about, this is primarily a long-term model to feed long-term mitigation needs, building codes, and so forth. It's designed to be an evaluation of the stable, long-term earthquake processes and hazards for the country, and it's designed to be stable. Obviously, our understanding of the earthquake process evolves over time, and so each time we update this every 6 years, it will change somewhat because we have new information, new modeling techniques, new understandings, and so forth. But over the long term, it doesn't change greatly. The hazard that you see there is roughly where it has been since we began doing this type of model back in the 90s. One of the things that is not included in this model, of course, is anthropogenic sources, areas where we believe that there are rapid changes in seismicity rates due to man's processes, industrial processes, and so forth. And so, as Nico said, back when we were conceiving of how to do this for the 2014 maps, it was decided that we would continue the practice that had been done before, which is to remove known anthropogenic sources from the seismic catalog that underpins these maps, and then separately treat the problem of those areas in a second product. And that's what we've done, and that's what I'll talk about today. As background, there's really 4 things that go into the seismic hazard analysis. The seismic hazard model sort of is an encompassing of what we know about the earthquake rates and the ground motions caused by earthquakes. And the primary inputs for that are shown here: the seismicity, the known earthquakes that we've recorded with seismometers or from paleoseismic studies; quaternary faults, what we know about the faults that may cause earthquakes; tectonics, what I've labeled here, is really what we know about the deformation of the ground, the geologic processes that are placing stresses on faults and causing earthquakes. We measure that primarily through geodesy, GPS, and so forth. And then once we have earthquakes, we need to be able to model how the ground motions result from those, and so we use what we call attenuation laws or ground motion prediction equations to do that, and that's what's shown in the ground motion box here. For the central and eastern U.S., we have a lot less information than we do in say, California on these things. Seismicity catalog, seismicity rate is relatively low. We've been recording earthquakes with a much sparser network. And for the faults, many of the faults that are problems in the central and eastern U.S. are unknown. They're buried. They're in the basement rocks, overlain by sedimentary cover, invisible at the surface. The geodetic strain rates are extremely low, difficult to characterize, and so it's hard to use GPS to pin that down. And then we've had relatively few large earthquakes in order to be able to nail down how the ground motions result from that. So central and eastern U.S. is a highly difficult and uncertain place to start with, and then of course when we throw new processes on top of that, it becomes even more so. But the long-term earthquake rates in the central and eastern U.S. have been quite stable. This is the underlying principle of the map. The black line here shows the rates over the entire central and eastern U.S. That's including the New Madrid active zone and so forth. And the lines all lying along the axis on the bottom there are for Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and so forth, which have extremely low rates. Until about 2009 when these rates took off, and that led into the problem of how do we go about characterizing hazards going forward. Now we know that the earthquake rates have gone up. There's a great deal of work that's gone into why, and we believe that in many cases this is due to wastewater injection and some other causes. The important thing from the point of view of hazards is that the rates are up, regardless of why. High earthquake rates mean high hazard, and high hazard is something that we want to characterize. Here's an illustration showing earthquakes from the 80s to 2015, and shown in the little black boxes are areas that were identified in 2014 as being areas of anomalous seismicity, things that were changing rapidly over time in ways that weren't in tune with this long-term concept in the national map. And the red areas are some in which there's ongoing work, and it's not really nailed down on whether those are anthropogenic or not. So the challenge is, how do we usefully project time-varying hazard? As Tom Jordan said, this is really an operational earthquake forecasting problem. There's time-varying hazards. We want to forecast that in a useful way using the best available science that we really think is in our hands. There's been a lot of advances in the understanding of these earthquakes, of induced seismicity in particular, but we lack a lot of the fundamental data that goes into it, data about wastewater injection, seismic catalogs in great detail, and so forth. So what we did back in 2014, we co-hosted a workshop with the Oklahoma Geological Survey, brought together a large number of people from industry, academia, state regulators, and so forth to discuss how to go forward. And two recommendations came out of that workshop. One is that we produce a quantification of the seismic hazard. There were many people who felt that that was really necessary in order to do good work in understanding and mitigation. And so we did that, and then a recommendation, again, there was that it be a one-year forecast. People felt that the science was at hand to usefully project hazard out over the course of months, maybe a year. Beyond that, these things are changing so rapidly, perhaps subject to regulatory or industrial changes, that might not be so believable. So we undertook that project. And we have produced, a few weeks ago, we published a one-year hazard model for 2016 that includes the hazard from all earthquakes, both induced and natural, for the central and eastern U.S. And it's a supplement, as I said, to the National Seismic Hazard Map. And it makes the assumption, the best available information we have in order to base this model is earthquake rates. We have good seismic catalogs, good enough seismic catalogs in the central and eastern U.S. to understand the earthquake rates, how they're changing, and project those rates forward in time. And that's the fundamental basis for the maps. And this is, I don't expect you to read this in detail. I just wanted to show that this is in the report if you are interested in this. It shows the logic tree, the set of weighted choices that were made in constructing the model. This is the probabilistic seismic hazard analysis method of choice. And as you can see, there's really two sides to this diagram, the green side and the blue side. And this is that we took both views of the world here. One, we said on the green side that these are induced earthquakes in these areas, and they're going to be treated a little bit differently with the best information we have about those. We're going to use short-term rates over the last couple of years to project forward. On the blue side, we said they're earthquakes. Earthquakes are earthquakes. Regardless of their cause, we're going to treat them as earthquakes, look over various time scales, and project forward, and so forth. Results are shown in a series of maps in the report. Here's just two of them here using the green model, the one that assumes induced earthquakes and not. And you can see these are seismic hazard maps that are a little bit different, but not largely different. In fact, it doesn't actually turn out to matter that much, the choice of whether these are induced or not. The earthquake, as I said, the hazard is high because the earthquake rates are high in the areas that are shown as the bright colors on this map. Another thing we did in this report was to translate it into chance of damage. And how we define chance of damage here is the likelihood that MMI 6, the threshold for light damage on structures, will be exceeded during the year 2016. And that's what's shown here. And as you can see, the likelihood over the U.S. is quite low in most places and high in some places. The map on the left shows a one-year snapshot of our 2014 model. This is just looking at the long-term model for the western U.S. and looking at the single year. The central and eastern portion of that is using our new model. And as you can see in portions of central Oklahoma, southern Kansas, a little bit around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and our perennial favorite New Madrid seismic zone, there are elevated risks of high ground motions during this calendar year. Some of the conclusions from the report, one is that of course, the high seismic rates produce hazard. Some of those hazards are quite high, higher than the national map by a factor of 3 or more in some cases. And some states, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Arkansas, may experience damage during this calendar year from earthquakes. And those are mostly in areas in which the earthquakes have been interpreted in the literature to be induced. In some areas, there's as much as a 5 to 12% chance that there'll be damage or damaging levels of ground motion during that time. So looking forward, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb, but I believe we are committed to updating this model in 2017 in some form. What that form will look like will be influenced in large measure by what feedback we get on the model that we produced this year, how is the information presented, what uses are made, what could we usefully do that would be an improvement about that. So we're very eager to hear from you. There's 3 ways in which we can improve the model. One is if we have information other than just seismicity, we can improve the source model, what the likelihood of earthquakes happening, where, how big, and how often, and how deep. And that will come from needing to know information about the geology, about the wastewater processes and so forth. Some of that information is not generally available. It's held by companies, or it's just simply not collected. And it'll be used, if we get that information, we can do a better job. Another is to improve those ground motion prediction equations. And a third is to improve the presentation of the material. What calculations is that would usefully put the information into something that can be used? And how can it be translated into ways and in methods, maps, tables, and so forth that would be most useful to you? So we're very eager to hear from you on that. And that's what I had for you today. Thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Schmiesing. I'm a director with Verisk Commercial Lines Underwriting Group. For those of you who may be wondering what interest Verisk has in earthquake resilience and induced seismicity, our focus is really around the collection, the analysis, and the ultimate dissemination of all data points that affect insurance underwriting decisions, claim servicing, as well as overall exposure risk management for the insurance industry. So by definition and by admission, I'm one of the insurance nerds that Glenn Pomeroy mentioned before. Some of you in the room might be more familiar with our catastrophe modeling arm, AIR Worldwide, who licenses a number of different CAT models around earthquake and tsunami for different geographies around the globe. During my portion of this panel, I'd like to focus really on induced seismicity through a somewhat different lens. And that's really the potential of this existing and this realized new hazard, not only on the built infrastructure and the new construction that's going to occur over the years in these newly realized regions from the USGS, but also the impacts it's going to have for all the different players and the moving parts when we talk about the very top of the the seismicity food chain all the way down to you and I and our built infrastructure. So when we talk about induced seismicity, we're really trying to answer the question of what happens when the science changes. And I do ask for your forgiveness. The science hasn't changed. It's really our understanding of that science is what's changing. So we need to focus on really getting answers to what are the impacts, and I think that's ultimately the question that a lot of us are addressing over the next 3 days during the various panels and presentations and the experts speaking during those. How do we quantify the hazard? There's going to be a lot of information, some of it that's going to go way over my head, I admit, and some of it that I think we can all relate to based on what we've been tasked to do through our focuses and through our employment with different groups in the space of earthquake science. After we've identified and quantified the risk, how accepting are those ultimate end users going to be? Do we need extra resources in place and different methods to deal with the naysayers and the skeptics? And induced seismicity, unfortunately, is one of those areas that there's a lot of political interests that are against the science that we'll see. They're trying to deny it. They're trying to use finances and power to get around that. Presentation and communication, these could be viewed as one and the same, but I've left them separate for reasons that I'll cover shortly here. And finally, how is the mitigation impacted? Or in this case, how does mitigation really begin as it somewhat encapsulates the other 5 bullets that we've just covered? I'll be spending the remainder of the time focusing on 4 bullets, really, and that's identifying, quantifying, communicating, and mitigation, and how these actions are in play for so many moving parts, but particularly around the adoption and enforcement of building codes in these affected communities that Mike just identified. The scientific research space has played a huge role, it's hard to even define, in the end development of construction practices as we know them today, and a focus on mitigating natural hazards. And these are both natural, works of Mother Nature as well as man-made hazards, and whether or not you want to put induced seismicity into column A or column B. And ultimately, these practices are adopted on a broad scale as part of the regulated model building codes that we use today. As we all know, the International Code Council, or the ICC, is the leading body of code modification and definition and upgrades, and nearly all the U.S. states and many foreign nations rely on the ICC codes to develop resilience of their own built environment. However, in the U.S., codes are adopted at the state level. It is a state issue, and in some cases, the decision is pushed down to the individual community level. And by delegating that authority, it creates a unique situation where many geographies have very differing levels of code adoption and enforcement. No one is forcing these states to keep up with the newest code. You have some states, for example, Maryland, who very quickly will adopt the newest code available and put it into law. And you have other states who are much slower to adopt, and they have different reasons for doing so. Oftentimes, the proposed code is met with opposition, as we talked about before, due to the necessary changes, and it could be construction practices, it could be finance necessary, it could be the expertise of the folks who are in charge of integrating these codes into play every day around the country. To add an additional layer of complexity, each individual community's building code department is unique in size, shape, and scope. They're all individual snowflakes, and through our experience, no two are alike, and those are changing day to day as well as they have turnover in their individual departments. Insurers have a vested interest as well in better understanding what building code departments are doing and what their capabilities are. And following Hurricane Andrew as well as Northridge quake, FEMA's MAT, or mitigation assessment teams, went out and sort of reviewed what the damage was after these major natural catastrophes in the U.S. And they returned back some information that the insurance industry found very useful, and that's that there were codes in place, but they weren't being followed as good as they could have been, especially in Florida. They knew what the building guidelines should have been, but upon further review after the winds came through, they showed a lot of damage that should have never occurred. The construction practices weren't being followed because nobody was enforcing these codes. Alternatively, after Northridge, they showed that communities, and a lot of these were suburbs, that did have strict enforcement showed lower damage ratios and showed less damage after the event itself because of building code enforcement. Verisk's ISO, or ISO Mitigation Division, has developed and operates the Building Code Effectiveness Grading Schedule, which is part of an insurance industry-driven program that reviews communities on key departmental and operational aspects and functional capabilities, including code or department organization, code adoption within that community and that state, plan reviews, how many they're reviewing, what the ratio is of denied plans as well. Inspections, are they conducting them for every bit of new construction or updated construction or additions, or is it only certain cases? Are there only certain buildings that fall under jurisdictions? As well as staff training and certification. Insurers are currently the main driver of this program because it does play into some of their underwriting practices and strategies. But really, we're very excited to address this group today because there is a very high level of involvement that's potentially there for the earthquake and individual community resilience level interest that we have some information that we'd love to discuss with anyone who is interested. So you can look at the impact as much more complex than just simple code adoption, whether the newest codes are in place or not. It's very clear that it's also enforcement plays a very large role in the whole scheme of things. And it's easy to understand why. So now we get to my favorite portion of all these presentations, and that's the interaction. By a show of hands, and I should caveat, I'm not a policeman, so don't worry about your answer. First off, how many of you have driven a car in the last month? All right. It's a little bright, so I can't tell anyways. Yeah. How many of you think speed limits are more of a suggestion than necessarily a rule? None of you. That's great. All right. So I think it's pretty evident. Almost everyone speeds some of the time, and some of us all of the time. That is until you see that, black or gunmetal Dodge Charger parked in the median, and immediately you tap on your brakes. You slow down. The big takeaway is enforcement is key. That's when the rules work. That's when the guidance work, when it's enforced. Just real quickly, some of the BSEG's program highlights. We collect over 1,200 data points during each evaluation in the 5 areas mentioned before. We recently celebrated our 20th anniversary of the program, graded over 20,000 communities and over 8,900 departments. Real quickly, a community is not serviced by just one department. You have some departments who look at multiple communities. The definition of a community varies. It could be one individual municipality. It could be an entire county and all the towns that fall in it. So that does vary. It accounts for over 87% of the population, and there's a handful of independent research papers that do support building code effectiveness. I just mentioned a couple from FEMA, as well as a few independent studies from Wharton around hail damage and wind damage in Florida that have recently been released. The program is used widely for insurance premium credits. If your town has a better program than the town 30 miles away, you're likely paying lower for insurance in some way, shape, or form than they are, or for property insurance. And FEMA uses the BSEG's program as part of 2 separate different grant programs that fall under the Hazard Mitigation Assistance grant program, as well as incorporating BSEGs into their NFIP Community Rating System program as well. I'd be remiss if my marketing department find out, they'd be mad. We recently released a National Building Code Assessment report in February of this year. You can download that report for free at the website listed here, and otherwise, come find myself or my colleague Chris Miller in the back, give us our business card, and we'll make sure you get a copy of that. Again, that sort of provides an insight and a snapshot into the current building codes at a state detail level, and also provides additional benchmarks around hazard, as well as individual scores in some of the communities. So overall, what's changed? Well, in terms of induced seismicity, it's now a fully realized hazard, as Mike sort of showed us already in mapping and how USGS is approaching everything to the population and built environment. However, we don't know what the long-term impacts are, and I think Dr. Luco covered that a little bit as well. It's a little bit of a moving target in terms of how we approach this hazard. The parties affected have very differing speeds of adaptability. Scientific field can make a discovery, do research, write a paper, put it out there. Engineering field has to understand what the impacts of that new hazard is to their calculations as they build stress models. They have to then convey that to the architects. The architects have to convey that to the builders. And then builders obviously get into political and insurance space, as well as you and I. If we want to build a new house, what are the costs associated? In terms of quantifying the impact presents its own individual challenges. USGS recognition is a huge step in that. It provides a little bit of relativity and scale when we put those maps up and show them next to New Madrid, next to the seismic quake map, or the western seismic risk, as well as some of the areas in South Carolina. And the hope is that the communities affected will start to identify as quake hazard regions. They will start to realize they need a plan in place, and they need to understand what the impact is going to be to them. We also look at, when we're quantifying, how do we identify the gaps that we do need additional resources, whether it's through grant funding or through other means. It could be upfront investments in structure. And also what resources are necessary, either human or financial, to bridge those gaps that we identify through the quantification. This map here shows the 2014 peak ground acceleration map that Mike talked to a little bit. And the good news is that there are communities out there who do recognize some of the hazard or the seismic hazard already in the areas that we're talking about under induced seismicity. The bad news is all the dots you see there are communities that do not actively recognize a seismic hazard through the BSEG's program. When you see parts of Oklahoma and North Texas, that is a little bit troubling to us because we do want these communities to fall under this recognition pattern. And hopefully in a couple of years, it'll look more like what we see down in Charleston, where there's sort of a big dome of recognizance, if you will, into the seismic hazard risk. So what must be done? Well, natural hazards are complicated, and I think anyone in this room who had to take 5, 6, 7 math classes or physics classes can attest to as well. It takes a lot of moving parts and a lot of coordination to get to the end result to improve the overall built environment. Does induced seismicity behave different than traditional quake activity? I think that's answers we're getting to in the present. Do we convey the information the same way? Is it traditional modified Mercalli indices? Do we use the PGA maps? Do we have to start talking about the actual activity that's causing these quakes? Do we look at the hydraulic pumping as a measure? Do we need to put that into the scale as well? And overall, new building practices, old building construction in terms of retrofitting, tradesman skills. There's a lot of different folks who are going to have to be educated. Dr. Luco talked a bit about it. It starts with the techies, it moves through the insurance nerds, and it gets down to the fuzzies finally, that there are many people who are going to have to be brought into the message. And I think this event today is sort of the groundwork for starting that movement right now. So it is an uphill battle. There's a lot of political interests we already talked on, financial interests. Prioritization is also an issue here, and specifically in Oklahoma, and I think Jason will cover as well. You came all the way to Long Beach. You came to an earthquake conference. You never thought some jerk would throw up a tornado map of all things. So Moore, Oklahoma is 22 square miles. They've had over 8 tornadoes in the last 22 years. So they're trying to tackle tornado hazard issues currently under their building codes, and now we have a whole other list of items that they need to cover for induced seismicity as well. So prioritization also plays into this whole role. Again, what must be done? Bringing everyone together in the room's a great start, and then really think about long-term investment when we talk about the upfront costs rather than just a quick fix to everything. Thank you.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure being here, but I must say that about a year and a half ago, I never would have thought that I would be at an earthquake conference, let alone speaking at one. Earthquakes are just not in my vocabulary, let alone could I even spell induced seismicity. So I'm going to go over a little bit as to what the city of Irving's response and what we have experienced about the past year and a half in regards to our seismicity. A little bit of background. City of Irving, roughly about 230,000 people. Our population goes up during the work week. We have a large business corridor. Our population goes up close to 300,000 during the work week. 13th most populous city in Texas, 94th largest in the U.S., about 70 square miles. Just to the west of Irving, you've probably been to Irving before and not known it, that's DFW Airport, one of the fourth largest international airport in the nation. Just to our east and north, that's city of Dallas. The whole population of this area, the 4 core counties, is about 7 million people. So you have a lot of people in a small area. And one thing I must say, that earthquakes do not respect city boundaries, county boundaries. They are felt by many, and it's not just an issue that's the city that's involved or where they're experiencing them. It's not just a Dallas or an Irving issue. It's an issue that's involved in the whole entire DFW Metroplex. So go off a little bit about the academic response. And I cannot say enough good things about SMU. We are very, very lucky that we had Southern Methodist University right there in Dallas, and the staff there has been second to none, providing information, meeting with us, meeting with our elected officials, meeting with the public, news interviews. They are the subject matter experts, and we could not have accomplished what we have so far without this staff. Basically, right now, they're providing a temporary research network since about 2013 to present for the couple of different sequences in our area. They operate 30-plus seismic stations in cooperation with USGS and the city of Irving. They archive their data with IRIS. They have master students that work on archiving the data to generate an earthquake catalog with the magnitudes and the areas that they're occurring. And right now in their catalog, they have about 1,300 earthquakes in SMU catalog. As far as the USGS measured events, our swarm, and that's a new term to us as well. When they started talking about that, we didn't know, do I need to go get some beekeeper outfits or something? Well, since our swarm has started since about April of 2014 to this current date, we have about 95 earthquakes in our catalog, from magnitude 1.8 to our largest, which is 3.6. We have had 9 events that have been larger than a magnitude 3.0. And our last reported event was a 2.1 in January of this year. Now, the seismographs that SMU operates, and they have many in the city limits of Irving, Dallas, and all the surrounding communities, they have measured over 600 earthquakes, and that's, from a magnitude 0 on up to the 3.6. And their last reported event was in April of this year. Some of our learning curve that we've had to experience with dealing with induced seismicity earthquakes has been the education on the size and scope of the issue that's at hand. We deal with severe weather, tornadoes, flooding, winter storms. We weren't, familiar with what you do for an earthquake. Drop cover hold on that's totally new to us. Subject matter experts, like I said, we are very fortunate to have SMU staff there, but there's not a lot of staff in the state of Texas that deal with seismicity and earthquakes. We don't have a geological survey per se, that's a state funded that has staff that go out and put out equipment and will, go out and research. That just doesn't exist in Texas. That has changed since. But we don't have staff at hand to help us along. The terminology, like any field, there's acronyms, having to catch up on what means what and what all these different acronyms mean, and hazard analysis and planning. Thankfully, we do an all hazards approach, but still it's an issue with having to plan for an event that you didn't expect was going to happen. Local and regional response. Our biggest thing has been partnerships with key stakeholders. Our local, state, federal partners, USGS staff, has been second to none as well as providing the information to us. Our school districts, it's really important. Our kiddos, we want to be sure they're safe when they're at school, and that's what people are most concerned about. When you have kids, that's your most important thing. So working with the school districts and having a plan on what to do when these events happen in the area, as well as partnering with the subject matter experts, SMU, University of Texas at Austin. Inspections. After the events happen, after about a 2.5 magnitude or greater, we inspect city infrastructure to be sure either if it's physically going out or checking our SCADA system for water utilities to be sure all the pipes have the right amount of flow they have through and to be sure they're not cracked. Partnering with the Texas Department of Transportation to inspect bridges, as well as Atmos for natural gas pipelines. We want to ensure that our infrastructure is safe because residents are concerned about that. Communicating. I'll get to that in a little bit more, but that's been one of the most important things that we've done is communicating with the businesses and the public. Formation of a regional working group, which I'll address in a minute, as well as House Bill 2, the TextNet system, which was funded last summer, and the city of Irving sent a lot of staff down to Austin multiple times to meet with our elected officials to ensure that this funding was pushed through. So now that we have a statewide, or are going to have a statewide network of seismic monitors throughout the state, and they're going to research it as to the causation and provide a report to the governor's office. So that's a big feather in our hat, and we're very proud of. Communications. When the event started, we were inundated with calls from businesses, the community, news media. It was hard to get anything done, let alone do we know what was going on or why it was happening. One important thing on this was consistent messaging. We got together with the other cities that were part of the work group and, forming the messages as to we're all saying the same thing. We provided, information on the normal, avenues, city website, social media, email listservs that we have set up already, like for the churches, the HOAs, the apartment complexes, where we pushed information out. Mailers, handouts, town hall meetings. We had several town hall meetings where people got to come and voice their concerns to city staff and elected officials. Some of them were very long and cumbersome, but I think it was good that the public had the opportunity to vent frustrations, as well as one-on-one with residents that we have done multiple times and met with people because people are truly, truly concerned. Some of the focuses of our earthquake working group that we formed, and this was out of an agreement with the mayor from the city of Dallas and the city of Irving, and our focus areas were public information, infrastructure risk due to ongoing seismic activity, impacts on current building codes, what that looks like, the response side, if we have a larger magnitude event, what our response is going to look like. Do we have enough resources? And in that, the resource gap analysis for large-scale events. Do we have what we need to get things done if we have a big event? Earthquake Working Group membership goes from everything from the academic institutions, local jurisdictions, to include building officials, emergency management, public safety staff, public information officers, city management, the different state entities, as well as federal entities, the Army Corps of Engineers, USGS, as well as FEMA has come to meet with us. And we, our group there for a while, we're meeting every month either on a conference call or in person. And we had USGS staff that were flying in to meet with us, and which was very, very helpful. Addressing some of the mitigation and planning, the mitigation measures are kind of difficult here because there's a lack of historical data. We just didn't have earthquakes in the north central Texas area, as well as funding. You know, we have, it's hard enough to get funding to handle the things that we have on a day-to-day basis, such as, you know, we just went through flooding last year. We had a tornado last year, getting funding to address those issues, let alone for earthquakes. Building codes is another big issue, and that we've tried to been planning for. Current codes follow the standards of a low seismic risk zones, the older maps of a lower magnitude event. At present, there's no indication that they need to be changed due to the recent activity, but we have some committees that are looking into that. And any proposed code changes would require around 3 to 4 years from start to finish to get implemented. And in the north central Texas area, each city kind of, we have a big group from a council of governments that approve building codes regionally. So this is something you wouldn't want to do where you would just have the city of Irving would totally change our building codes to address ground movement and seismic activity. You want to ensure it's a regional thing, as well as an economic impact study for code changes that would be conducted prior to any proposals. As far as planning goes, thankfully we respond to results, not causes. We take the all hazards approach. I don't have a tornado plan. I don't have a flooding plan. We have an all hazards plan. Search and rescue from a building collapse to a tornado is going to look exactly like an earthquake. So we handle all hazards planning. And I don't plan to get an earthquake plan. We feel that we have enabled staff, trained them to be able to respond to any type of event that we may encounter. But we have included seismic activity and earthquakes in our hazard mitigation action plan, as it is addressed and it's documented to show that it is there. It is a threat that we do face. And lastly, I'm going to go over some local needs and some gaps. And some of these are frustrations, some of these are the learning curve issue. But for other entities, cities, municipalities, states that have gone through this, induced seismicity, earthquakes that haven't had them before, we reached out to several of these areas in Oklahoma and other states and you know, got some, you know, what should I do? So we had some of the same frustrations and things that they had. Is we can encourage the subject matter experts when these things happen, reach out to these cities and provide, you know, say, hey, we're here to help. You may not understand what's going on, but we're here to help. If anything you need, you know, education of those regions. Best practices, that would be so helpful, having some best practices of what you should be doing, what has happened in the past, because there's not a lot of that out there. And I know this is going to be frustrating, but concrete data, when you go to an elected official and say, well, I don't know, they don't know how big it's going to get. They don't know how many we're going to have. And I know it's science and it takes time to do studies, but when you go to elected officials, they don't want to hear, well, it's going to take a couple years to conduct a study until we have any causation. So that's just something, you know, that's kind of frustrating, but we understand that it takes time and data. Events have to happen for you to be able to study it, to be able to provide information. What the worst case scenario is would be nice. And a lot of that is, well, I don't know, it could be a 6 magnitude, could be a 5, could be a 7. So a lot of that is trying to get, you know, concrete data and timely information. Like I said, it takes time to do studies, but we totally understand. A better understanding of infrastructure and building risks due to the ongoing threat of seismic activity. What that looks like if we have chronic seismicity for years and years and years and years. You may have just these 2.2, 2.0, 1.5 events, but what that's going to do to the infrastructure if this persists for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, as well as what it looks like for a larger magnitude event. And then lastly is the big one, is causation, and that's the big key. Everybody wants to know what's causing the events, and everybody has their theories, But, you know, we're looking to the scientific community to do these professional studies that are going to be documented, where we can take these reports and take them to our elected officials and the news media and say, this is why it's going on, this is what's happening. So with that, that's all I have, and thank you very much.